The strange thing about funerals is how quickly grief turns into logistics. Flowers disappear, chairs get folded away, people stop hugging you, and suddenly, everyone starts talking about paperwork. That part always felt cold to me. Too fast, too practical. My mother had only been buried 3 days earlier when my stepfather changed completely. Not slowly, immediately. Like he'd been waiting for the performance to end. At the funeral, he cried harder than anyone, held people tightly, talked endlessly about our family. But the second the guest disappeared, so did the act. Looking back now, that shift happened so fast it almost felt rehearsed. The first sign was dinner, or more accurately, the silence during dinner. We sat across from each other in the kitchen. Same kitchen my mother loved. Same yellow curtains she refused to replace for years. But without her there, the room felt empty in a way I can't fully explain. My stepfather Richard barely looked at me the entire meal. No small talk, no checking if I was okay, nothing. Then finally, he set his fork down and sighed heavily. I've been thinking. That sentence alone made my stomach tighten, because people rarely begin good conversations that way after funerals. I stayed quiet, listening. Richard leaned back slowly. This house is going to need some changes. Changes? Interesting word, because people always use vague language first when preparing to say something cruel. I nodded slightly. What kind of changes? He avoided eye contact immediately. Another bad sign. Well, eventually you'll need your own place. There it was, not direct enough to challenge immediately, but clear enough to hurt. I stared at him quietly for a second, not fully processing yet. My own place? Richard rubbed his forehead dramatically. You're not a child anymore. Interesting, because I was somehow old enough to be removed, but apparently not important enough to discuss it honestly beforehand. My mother just died, I replied quietly. That line should have changed the conversation, should have softened him. It didn't. I know, he sighed, but realistically, this situation can't stay permanent. Situation, not family, situation. That wording mattered a lot because suddenly I understood something terrifying. He already stopped seeing me as part of the house emotionally, maybe long before my mother died. Looking back now, I realize Richard always tolerated me more than cared about me. There's a difference. And grief exposes differences brutally. The next few days became strange quickly. Richard started reorganizing things almost immediately. My mother's clothes disappeared from closets. Family photos vanished from shelves. Even her favorite chair got moved out of the living room. Too fast, everything felt too fast. Like he wasn't grieving, he was clearing space. One afternoon, I came downstairs and froze completely. A real estate agent was standing in our kitchen, smiling politely, holding paperwork. Richard noticed me immediately, and for a split second, he looked annoyed. I interrupted. That reaction told me everything. What's going on? I asked carefully. The agent shifted awkwardly. Richard answered casually, just exploring options. Options, of course, because apparently my childhood home became an option before my mother had even been gone a full week. You're selling the house? I asked quietly. Richard crossed his arms instantly. I'm considering it. No discussion, no warning, just decisions already happening around me. The agent excused herself awkwardly a few minutes later. Good choice, honestly, because the second she left, the atmosphere changed completely. Richard looked exhausted suddenly, not sad, impatient. I don't want this becoming emotional, he said immediately. That almost made me laugh. People always say that right before saying something heartless. You're trying to sell Mom's house days after the funeral, I replied. Our house, he corrected sharply. Sharp correction, fast correction, that part mattered deeply because possession was already important to him. Very important. I looked around the kitchen slowly. Every memory of my mother existed inside those walls. And suddenly, I felt something worse than grief. Displacement, like home itself, was starting to reject me. Then Richard finally said the thing he'd clearly wanted to say all week. You should start packing. Silence. Real silence, because even after everything, part of me still didn't believe he'd actually say it out loud. I'm sorry? I whispered. He sighed dramatically again. I can't support you forever? Support me. Interesting rewrite. I paid part of the bills, bought groceries, handled most things during mom's treatments, but suddenly he spoke like I'd been some burden he generously carried. That's the thing about manipulative people. They rewrite history quickly once accountability disappears. You're kicking me out, I said quietly. Richard looked away immediately. I'm moving forward. No, he was removing obstacles, there's a difference, and suddenly something inside me shifted, not emotionally, mentally, because the conversation stopped feeling like grief. It started feeling strategic, calculated, prepared. I remembered something my mother said months earlier during treatment. Small moment, easy to forget at the time. If anything happens to me, she whispered one night, don't let Richard rush you. At the time, I thought she meant emotionally. Now, I wasn't so sure. Richard stood up slowly from the table. I think it's best if you're out by Friday. Friday, 3 days away, that told me everything. Because people who act that quickly already planned the timeline beforehand. I stared at him carefully, then asked the question that changed everything. Did Mom leave a will? Silence, tiny silence, but enough. Richard's expression shifted immediately, not grief, not confusion, annoyance, and suddenly I knew. There was something he didn't want me seeing. The second I asked about the will, Richard looked away. Tiny movement, fast but enough. Because people only avoid eye contact when the truth becomes inconvenient. What will? He replied casually, too casually. That part mattered immediately. My mother was organized about everything bills, insurance, medical paperwork. There was absolutely no chance she died without preparing legal documents. None. And suddenly, I understood exactly why Richard wanted me gone quickly. Speed hides things, questions slow them down. I leaned back slightly. Mom absolutely had a will. Richard sighed dramatically. She mentioned paperwork once, but nothing official was finalized. Interesting, not there isn't one. Just uncertainty, vague uncertainty. Manipulative people love uncertainty when facts work against them. I stared at him quietly for a moment, then asked carefully, did a lawyer contact you? Silence again. Another bad sign. Finally, I'm handling it. There it was, control, always control, because the second someone says, I'm handling it instead of answering directly, something's being hidden. Looking back now, that was the moment I stopped seeing Richard as grieving family and started seeing him as someone managing an agenda. The next morning, I started searching through my mother's office upstairs. Not dramatically, carefully, because my mother kept copies of everything. Folders labeled perfectly, dates highlighted, sticky notes everywhere. The room still smelled faintly like her perfume. That part almost broke me, because suddenly, this wasn't about a house anymore. It was about the terrifying feeling of someone trying to erase her presence too quickly. I searched for almost 2 hours. Nothing. No will, no attorney folder, no estate paperwork. Too clean. Suspiciously clean. Then I noticed something strange. One drawer near the bottom desk cabinet had fresh scratches near the lock. Recently forced open, I froze immediately because suddenly I knew Richard searched here already, probably before the funeral ended. That realization made me physically sick. Not because of money, because grief and greed were happening in the same house simultaneously, and greed was winning. Later that evening, Richard came home carrying boxes. More boxes, packing boxes. He barely acknowledged me. I talked to the realtor again, he said casually. Realtor? Again, like everything was already moving forward on schedule. You move fast, I replied quietly. He stopped taping one of the boxes for a second, then shrugged. Life moves on. No, people move on. Love doesn't move that fast. That sentence stayed with me heavily because suddenly I realized something painful. Richard wasn't acting like someone devastated. He was acting relieved, and once you notice relief hiding underneath grief, you can't unsee it. That night, I barely slept. My mother's words kept replaying in my head. Don't let Richard rush you. Rush me toward what? That question finally mattered now. Around midnight, I remembered something suddenly. A conversation from months earlier during one of Mom's hospital appointments. She asked me to scan some documents into a storage account for her. At the time, it felt routine. Just another thing helping during treatment, but now I wondered if she planned ahead more carefully than I realized. I grabbed my laptop immediately, logged into the old cloud account she used. Hundreds of folders appeared: medical files, insurance forms, photos. Then one folder caught my attention instantly: personal, open if needed. My heart started racing immediately. I clicked it. Inside, one document, PDF, password protected, and beneath it, a short typed note. If Richard starts making decisions too quickly, call Angela. Angela, my mother's lawyer. Everything inside me went completely still. Because suddenly, I knew two things at once. First, my mother absolutely expected problems. Second, Richard knew less than he thought. I called Angela first thing the next morning. The second I mentioned my mother's name, her tone changed immediately. Oh, thank God, she whispered. That sentence alone told me everything. You've been trying to reach me? I asked carefully. Yes, she replied instantly. Richard stopped responding after the funeral. There it was, not grief, interference, deliberate interference. Angela asked me to come to her office immediately. And honestly, that the second I walked inside, I knew the entire situation was about to change. She already had files spread across the desk waiting, prepared, organized, official. Your mother updated everything 6 months ago, Angela explained carefully. Updated everything. Richard lied completely. I sat down slowly, heart pounding now, not from fear anymore, from realization. Angela opened one folder carefully, then slid a sealed envelope across the desk. She wanted this read in person if there were problems after her death? Problems. My mother predicted this exactly. That realization hurt almost more than Richard's behavior itself, because it meant she saw this side of him before I did. Angela opened the envelope slowly, then began reading aloud. To my child, if you're hearing this, Richard has probably started rushing decisions already. I closed my eyes briefly because somehow, even hearing my mother's words through someone else felt comforting. Strong, certain. The letter continued. I stayed quiet about many things during my marriage because peace felt easier at the time. Pause, then. That was my mistake. That line hit hard, very hard, because suddenly I understood my mother more clearly than ever before. She knew Richard controlled situations through pressure, through speed, through making people emotionally exhausted enough to stop questioning him, and she was trying to protect me from it after she was gone. Angela looked at me carefully before continuing. The house legally belongs to you. Silence, complete silence, because suddenly everything snapped into place perfectly. The urgency, the packing, the realtor, the pressure to leave quickly. Richard wasn't protecting his home. He was trying to secure a house that wasn't his, not legally, not permanently, mine, completely mine. My mother transferred ownership months before she died, quietly, carefully, without telling Richard. And honestly, I finally understood why, because she knew exactly what would happen otherwise. Angela handed me the official documents: deed transfer, signatures, legal confirmation, every page undeniable. And suddenly, Richard's confidence looked almost pathetic in retrospect. He spent days trying to remove the actual owner from their own house. Looking back now, that level of arrogance almost impresses me. Almost. Then Angela read the final part of my mother's letter. If Richard tries forcing you out, remind him of one thing: love doesn't erase legal ownership. That line stayed with me permanently because it was exactly the kind of thing my mother would say: calm, direct, impossible to misunderstand. I drove home immediately afterward. Not emotional, focused, clear, and for the first time since the funeral, I didn't feel displaced anymore. I felt informed. Huge difference. Richard was in the living room when I arrived, sorting paperwork, probably house sale paperwork. He looked up casually, then frowned immediately. You're late. Interesting. Not concern. Control again. Always control. I placed the folder calmly on the coffee table. We need to talk. His expression shifted slightly, tiny crack, but enough. I already told you. You lied about the will? I interrupted calmly. Silence, immediate silence. Richard stared at the folder, then at me. And suddenly, I saw it: fear, real fear. You went through private documents? He snapped defensively. Wrong move. Because innocent people deny accusations first, guilty people attack process instead. I opened the folder slowly, then placed the deed transfer directly in front of him. He looked down, and everything drained from his face instantly, completely. No confidence, no irritation, nothing, just shock. That's impossible, he whispered. I almost laughed. Because people always call truth impossible after building plans around lies. Mom transferred ownership before she died, I replied quietly. Richard grabbed the papers quickly, reading faster now, panicking visibly. She never told me. That sentence accidentally exposed everything. Because notice what he didn't say. Not this is fake, not there's been a mistake. Just shocked that she excluded him. That mattered deeply. You tried throwing me out of my own house, I said calmly. Silence again. Heavy silence. Richard rubbed his forehead aggressively. She wouldn't do this to me. No, she protected me from him. Big difference, and deep down, he finally understood that now. I handed him my mother's letter last. He read silently for almost a full minute, and the longer he read, the smaller he looked somehow.